the silence in the house was not empty. It was expensive. It was the kind of curated hush that only thick glass, steel reinforcement, and 6 acres of private coastline could purchase. Alara sat at the expansive oak island in her kitchen, the surface cool against her forearms. In front of her, a single porcelain cup of matcha steamed, its verdant scent battling the saline tang of the Pacific Ocean, drafting in through the cracked sliding door. She was 32,000 feet of square footage and 10 years of relentless, bloodletting ambition away from the girl she used to be. Yet when the security panel chimed, a soft, melodic 3-note alert, her heart hammered against her ribs with the distinct, frantic rhythm of a frightened teenager. She didn't move immediately. She let the sound hang in the air, suspending the moment. Her home, a brutalist marvel of concrete and cantilevered glass perched on the jagged cliffs of Big Sur, was designed to intimidate. It was a fortress of solitude she had built not just to live in, but to prove a point to a world that had once deemed her surplus. Few people had the code to the main gate. Deliveries were left in the drop box half a mile down the road. Friends, the few she allowed close, texted before they arrived. The chime sounded again. Insistent. Alara slid off the stool, her silk robe whispering against the polished concrete floor. She walked to the wall-mounted iPad near the foyer, her bare feet silent. With a tap of a manicured finger, the screen flared to life, revealing the grainy, wide-angle feed from the front gate camera. The breath left her lungs in a sharp, painful hiss. The camera distorted them slightly, stretching their shapes at the edges, but there was no mistaking the posture. The man wore a beige windbreaker that had seen better decades, his shoulders hunched against the coastal wind. The woman stood slightly behind him, clutching a knockoff designer handbag with both hands like a shield. Her hair dyed a shade of blonde too brassy for her aging complexion. Robert and Linda. They looked smaller than she remembered. In the architecture of her nightmares, they were towering giants, monoliths of judgment who cast shadows that swallowed the sun. On the high-definition screen, they looked like what they were. 2 eroding people standing next to a dented Ford sedan that was leaking oil onto her pristine paver driveway. Alara stared at the image, tracing the lines of her father's jaw, the nervous twitch of her mother's head. The memory didn't wash over her. It pierced her. It was 10 years ago, almost to the day. The porch light of the cramped suburban bungalow flickering, the duffel bag, green canvas, broken zipper, landing in the wet grass. She remembered the humiliation burning hotter than the tears. She remembered asking where she was supposed to go. She remembered her mother turning off the porch light, plunging the world into darkness, effectively erasing her daughter from existence. "You'll never be anything without us. You'll be back in a week, begging." She hadn't gone back. She had slept in a library stairwell for 3 nights. She had washed dishes until her hands bled. She had put herself through design school on sheer spite and caffeine, climbing the lattice of the architectural world until she wasn't just someone. She was the someone. Now, the woman on the screen reached out and pressed the intercom button again. Alara pressed the talk icon, but kept the camera on her end disabled. She needed to hear them first. She needed to know if the voice still held the power to make her small. "Hello?" Her father's voice crackled through the speaker. It sounded thin, stripped of its old thunder. Is this the residence of Alara Vance?" Alara stared at her own reflection in the darkened glass of the hallway mirror. She saw the sharp cut of her jaw, the cold intelligence in her eyes, the woman who had built empires out of thin air. "Yes," she said. Her voice was steady, dropping an octave lower than they would remember. A boardroom voice. "Alara?" Her mother's voice joined in, pitched high with a forced, trembling brightness. "Oh, thank God. We weren't sure. The GPS, it took us on such a winding road. It's Mom and Dad." "I see you," Alara said. "Can you buzz us in?" Robert asked, trying to sound authoritative but failing. He looked around at the imposing steel gates, the cameras, the sheer scale of the barrier between them. It's freezing out here." For a long moment, Alara's finger hovered over the open command. She could leave them there. She could tell them to turn around, to drive back down the winding highway and disappear into the mediocrity they had tried to chain her to. It would be just. It would be fair. But fairness wasn't what she wanted. She wanted them to see. She wanted them to drive up the quarter-mile driveway lined with imported cypress. She wanted them to stand in the shadow of the 30-foot glass atrium. She wanted them to step inside and feel the crushing weight of their own wrongness. She pressed the button. "Follow the lights," she said, and cut the connection. She didn't dress. She didn't rush to put on makeup or armor herself in a power suit. She remained in her silk robe, the one that cost more than the car they were driving. She tightened the sash, smoothed her hair back, and walked to the massive pivot door that served as the main entrance. She watched through the side light window as the dented Ford labored up the steep incline. It looked like a beetle crawling across a marble slab. When it finally came to a halt in the circular drive, the engine sputtered and died with a pathetic wheeze. Alara opened the door before they could knock. The ocean breeze rushed past her, chilling the air, but she didn't shiver. She stood framed in the towering doorway, backlit by the warm golden glow of the interior foyer. She looked like a deity peering down from Olympus. Robert and Linda froze halfway up the stone steps. They took her in, the height she had gained, or perhaps the posture, the luxury of the fabric against her skin, the terrifying calmness of her face. Her mother recovered first. It was a performance Alara recognized instantly. The smoothing of the skirt, the widening of the eyes, the fabrication of a warmth that had never existed. Linda rushed up the remaining steps, arms outstretched, ignoring the ice in Alara's gaze. "Alara!" she cried out, her voice cracking with an emotion that sounded suspiciously like relief mixed with avarice. She stopped just short of hugging her daughter, halted by the invisible wall of Alara's stillness. Linda clasped her hands together, looking past Alara into the cavernous, art-filled living room beyond. Her eyes dilated as they took in the custom chandelier, the view of the ocean, the sheer, undeniable smell of victory. She turned her gaze back to Alara, a smile stretching her face tight, erasing 10 years of abandonment with 2 syllables. "Oh, look at you," Linda breathed, her voice trembling with a sickly sweetness. "My beautiful, successful girl, we missed you so much, darling." Alara looked at the woman's hands, the same hands that had locked the door 10 years ago. Then she looked at her father, who was scuffing his shoes on the limestone, looking everywhere but at her eyes. "Darling," Alara repeated, the word tasting like ash. She didn't step aside to let them in. Not yet. "You're a long way from home, Robert, Linda." "We came to see you," her father said, finally meeting her gaze. There was a desperation there, a hunger that had nothing to do with parental love, and everything to do with the eviction notice Alara suspected was sitting on their kitchen table back in Ohio. We wanted to make things right." "Is that so?" Alara leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms. "And here I thought you only bet on sure things." "Oh, stop it," Linda laughed nervously, trying to push past the tension. "We're family. Family helps each other. Look at this place. We always knew you had it in you, didn't we, Bob? We always said Alara was the special one." The lie was so audacious, so perfectly contradictory to the memory of the rain and the screaming and the "you'll never be anything," that Alara almost laughed. But she didn't. She simply stared at them, dissecting them, realizing with a cold jolt of satisfaction that the monsters were gone. There were only parasites left. She stepped back, swinging the massive door fully open, inviting the infection inside. "Come in," Alara said softly, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I'm dying to hear how you remember it." They crossed the threshold, bringing the smell of stale car air and cheap fabric softener into the hermetically sealed perfection of her sanctuary. The foyer was a vast, echoing chamber of slate and shadow, dominated by a floating staircase that looked less like steps and more like slices of obsidian suspended in anti-gravity. Robert hesitated as his foot hit the polished concrete, the squeak of his rubber-soled orthopedic shoe sounding like a gunshot in a cathedral. He looked down, as if afraid he might crack the floor, or perhaps that the floor might judge him. "Shoes," Linda fluttered, reaching down to unbuckle her strap with a grunt of exertion. "We should take off our—" "Leave them," Alara said, her voice cutting through the space without raising in volume. She tightened the sash of her robe, enjoying the way the silk felt against her skin, a tactile barrier between her and them. "The floors are heated, and they're stone. They can handle a little dirt." She led them into the main living area, a space that defied the claustrophobia of the suburban bungalow she had grown up in. The room was a glass box suspended over the Pacific, the walls retracted to blur the line between the interior and the violent churning of the ocean 300 feet below. The sun was setting, bleeding bruised purples and arterial reds across the horizon, casting long, harsh shadows through the room. Linda gasped. It was a theatrical sound, designed to flatter, but Alara could hear the genuine intake of breath beneath it. The avarice was a physical weight in the room. Linda's eyes darted from the Italian leather sectional to the abstract sculpture, a twisted piece of bronze that cost more than Robert had made in the entire 90s, calculating, assessing, appraising. "My God," Robert whispered. He walked to the edge of the glass, looking down at the waves crashing against the rocks. He kept his hands in his pockets, afraid to touch the glass, afraid to leave a print. It's a lot of house for one person, isn't it, Alara?" "It's exactly enough house for who I am now," Alara replied. She walked to the wet bar, a slab of backlit onyx that glowed with a ghostly luminescence. "Drink?" "Oh, just water for me," Linda said, finally tearing her eyes away from a massive fiddle-leaf fig to look at her daughter. "Or, do you have any iced tea?" Alara didn't turn around. She selected a crystal tumbler, heavy and sharp-edged. "I have scotch. I have vodka. I have water. I don't have iced tea." "Water is fine," Linda said quickly. "Bob? A beer, if you have one." Alara opened the hidden refrigerator drawer. It was stocked with sparkling water and champagne. There was no beer. There hadn't been beer in her life since the days of lukewarm kegs in college dorms, the only places she could sleep when the library was closed. "Scotch it is," Alara decided. She poured a generous measure of a 25-year-old single malt for her father and a glass of sparkling water for her mother. She poured nothing for herself. She needed her edges sharp. She walked over and handed Robert the glass. He took it with a trembling hand, his knuckles swollen with arthritis. The contact lasted a fraction of a second, but it sent a jolt of revulsion through her. His skin felt papery, dry, mortal. "Sit," she commanded, gesturing to the sectional. They sat close together, sinking awkwardly into the low-profile furniture. The design was meant for lounging, for confident sprawls, not for two people holding onto their knees as if bracing for a collision. Alara remained standing, leaning against the onyx bar, placing herself between them and the exit, between them and the rest of the house. "So," Alara began, the silence stretching until it hummed, "you're here to make things right. That's what you said." Linda nodded vigorously, her brassy bob bouncing. "We've been thinking about you constantly, Alara. Every day. We realized we were hard on you. We were just scared. You know how it is raising a child. You want them to be safe. We thought tough love was the answer." "Tough love?" Alara repeated, tasting the phrase. "Is that what you call changing the locks? Is that what you call telling the police I was a runaway so I couldn't come back to get my birth certificate?" Robert flinched. He took a large gulp of the scotch, coughing as the peaty fire hit his throat. "We made mistakes," he rasped. "We're not perfect people, Alara, but we're your parents. Blood matters. Blood is a biological accident," Alara said coolly. Architecture is intentional. I built this life intentionally. You were demolition. A soft chime echoed through the room, not the doorbell this time, but the sleek black slab of her phone resting on the coffee table. The screen lit up. Julian, Vanguard Project. Alara glanced at it. It was urgent. The Vanguard Tower in Tokyo was in the middle of a structural crisis regarding the seismic dampeners. Millions of dollars were hemorrhaging by the hour. Ignoring it would be professional suicide. But looking at her parents, small, fearful, and clearly waiting for the right moment to ask for money, she realized she could use this. She picked up the phone. "Excuse me, I have to take this. It concerns a $400 million asset." She saw Robert's eyes widen. The number hit him like a physical blow. Alara swiped the screen and put it on speaker, holding the phone casually in her hand. "Julian, talk to me." "Absolutely not," Alara said, her voice dropping into the icy register that made contractors sweat. She paced slowly in front of her parents, performing the role of the titan they never believed she could be. "The facade is the signature. Tell them if they can't make the math work on the dampeners, I'll fly a team from Zurich out there tomorrow to replace them. I'm not compromising the aesthetic for their incompetence. Tell them to reinforce the core if they have to, but the glass stays. I don't care about the fees, Julian. I care about my vision. Fix it. Or I'll find someone who can." She hung up without waiting for a reply and tossed the phone back onto the table. The clatter sounded loud in the stunned silence. She looked at her parents. They were staring at her as if she had just grown wings and breathed fire. The dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Before, she was their daughter who had gotten lucky. Now, she was a foreign power. "Work," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "You were saying? Something about blood?" Linda licked her lips. Her eyes were glued to the phone, then back to Alara. The hunger was naked now. "Alara, honey, we are so proud. Truly. You've done incredible things." "Cut the preamble, Linda," Alara said. She walked over to the window, turning her back on them to watch the last sliver of sun disappear into the ocean. The room began to darken, the ambient lighting shifting to a cool, moody blue. "You didn't drive a dying car 600 miles to tell me you're proud. You're here because you need something. And since you're already inside my house, tracking oil onto my driveway and dust onto my floors, you might as well say it." She heard the rustle of clothing as Robert shifted. He set the glass down on the coaster with a heavy clink. "The house is gone," Robert said. His voice was devoid of the bluster he had tried to maintain at the gate. It was the voice of a beaten man. Alara didn't turn around. "The bungalow?" "Foreclosed," he said. "The bank took it 3 weeks ago. We've been staying at a Motel 6 off the interstate. We ran out of money for the room yesterday morning." Alara closed her eyes for a brief second. A flash of memory. The smell of that house. The beige carpets. The stifling mediocrity. The way they had guarded it like a castle, terrified she would tarnish it with her artistic ambitions and her refusal to settle for a clerical job at the insurance firm. "So you're homeless," Alara stated. "We're displaced," Linda corrected quickly, her pride flaring up like a dying ember. "It's temporary. Dad's pension. There was a mix-up. And the medical bills for his hip." "Displaced," Alara repeated, turning around to face them. She leaned back against the glass, the abyss of the ocean behind her. "And let me guess. You remembered you had a daughter. A daughter who, coincidentally, you haven't spoken to since you threw her bag onto the lawn. And you thought, surely she has a guest room." "We just need a place to get back on our feet," Robert pleaded, his hands clasped together. "A few weeks, maybe a month, just until the pension clears. Look at this place, Alara. You have wings of this house you probably don't even walk into. We wouldn't be a bother. We'd be invisible." "Invisible," Alara mused. "Like I was?" "Alara, please. Linda stood up, clutching her handbag so tight her knuckles were white. "We're your parents. You can't just let us sleep in a car, not when you live like this." This was the moment, the fulcrum upon which the night balanced. Alara looked at them, really looked at them. She saw the fraying threads of Robert's collar. She saw the gray roots in Linda's hair. She saw the terror in their eyes. It wasn't just the terror of poverty. It was the terror of irrelevance. They were fading away, and she was burning brighter than ever. She could write them a check. It would mean nothing to her bank account. She could put them in a hotel. She could even let them stay in the guest house down the cliffside path where she would never have to see them. But the anger, the cold, crystallized spite that had fueled her for a decade, demanded more than charity. It demanded payment. "I have a guest wing," Alara said softly. Hope, bright and pathetic, washed over their faces. Linda took a step forward. "Oh, Alara. Thank you, I knew—" "Stop." Alara held up a hand. The sharpness of the gesture froze Linda in place. "I didn't say you could stay in it." She walked slowly toward them, her bare feet silent on the stone. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough to smell the stale coffee on their breath. "You want to stay here?" Alara asked. "In my fortress? In the world I built from the scraps you threw away?" "Yes," Robert whispered. "Then you earn it," Alara said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "I have a gala next week, here, in this house. 200 of the most influential people in California. Architects, senators, tech moguls. We can help," Linda offered eagerly. "I can cook. I can help set up." Alara laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. "No, Linda, you won't cook. My caterers cook. You will attend. You will wear what I tell you to wear. You will stand where I tell you to stand. And when people ask who you are, you will tell them the truth." "The truth?" Robert asked warily. "You will tell them," Alara said, her eyes boring into her father's, "that you are the people who told me I was worthless. You will tell them that you kicked me out with nothing. You will tell them that everything I am in spite of you, not because of you. You will be a living exhibit of my origin story. You will let me parade your failure to support me as the ultimate proof of my own strength." She tilted her head, watching the realization sink in. She wasn't offering hospitality. She was offering a pillory. "Do that," Alara said, "and you can stay for a month. Refuse, and you can get back in that leaking Ford and drive until the gas runs out." The silence in the room was absolute. The only sound was the distant rhythmic pounding of the ocean against the cliffs, eroding the stone, grain by grain. Robert looked at Linda. Linda looked at the floor, then at the velvet sofas, the high ceilings, the warmth, the safety. Alara waited. She knew what they would choose. Survival always trumped dignity. She had learned that in the library stairwell 10 years ago. Now, it was their turn to learn. "Well?" Alara asked. Linda looked up. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. "What should we wear?" Linda asked. The week leading up to the gala was a lesson in logistics. Alara managed her parents the way she managed a difficult supply chain, with precise instructions and zero emotional investment. A stylist was hired to drape Linda in midnight blue silk that hid her trembling hands. A tailor was summoned to force Robert's slumped shoulders into a tuxedo that cost more than the foreclosure debt on their bungalow. When the night arrived, the house transformed. The floor-to-ceiling windows were thrown open, blurring the line between the polished limestone floors and the jagged cliffs beyond. The air smelled of sea salt and expensive perfume. Waiters moved like ghosts through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that looked like pieces of modern art. Alara stood at the top of the floating staircase, watching the 200 guests mill about below. Julian was there, laughing with a Japanese structural engineer, the dampener crisis apparently averted. Senators, tech CEOs, and the glitterati of the architectural world were all admiring the lines of her home. But the real centerpiece was waiting near the grand piano. Alara descended, the crowd parting for her. She wore white, sharp, angular, severe. She approached her parents. They looked terrified, holding their crystal flutes as if they were grenades. "It's time," Alara said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of a gavel. She placed a hand on Robert's shoulder. He flinched, then stiffened. She guided them toward a circle of people that included the editor of Architectural Digest and a venture capitalist named Thorne, who had funded her first skyscraper. "Alara," Thorne boomed, raising his glass. "The place is magnificent, a true testament to your genius. And these must be the creators? The parents?" The circle quieted. Expectant smiles formed. This was the moment for the standard script. "We're so proud she was always drawing. We knew she'd be a star." Alara stepped back, leaving her parents exposed in the spotlight. She sipped her champagne and waited. Linda looked at Robert. Robert looked at his shoes, then at the venture capitalist. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing above the silk bow tie. "We are the parents," Robert said, his voice raspy. He cleared his throat. "But we aren't creators. We were obstacles." Thorne's smile faltered slightly. "Excuse me?" Linda stepped in, reciting the lines she had rehearsed in the guest wing mirror for 3 days. Her face was pale, her eyes fixed on Alara's chin, unable to meet her gaze. "We didn't believe in Alara's vision," Linda said. Her voice was thin, brittle. "When she wanted to create, we told her to be practical. When she wanted to build, we told her to settle. We threw her out because she wouldn't conform to our smallness." A hush rippled outward from the circle. The ambient chatter of the party seemed to dampen, drawn into the gravity of the confession. "She is standing here," Robert continued, his voice cracking with a humiliation that felt physically heavy in the room. "Not because of our support, but because she had to survive us. We are the wreckage she climbed over to reach the sky." The silence that followed was thick. Thorne looked from the parents to Alara, confused, searching for the punchline. But Alara wasn't smiling. She was watching them with the clinical detachment of a surgeon observing a successful incision. Then slowly, Alara nodded. "Thank you," she said to them, "for the honesty." She turned to Thorne, her expression brightening into a charming, professional mask. "It's important to remember where we come from, don't you think, Marcus? Resistance creates strength. Without the wind, the tower doesn't learn how to stand." Thorne blinked, then let out a startled, impressed laugh. "My God, Alara, you turn even your trauma into a design feature. Ruthless. I love it." The circle laughed with him. The tension broke, reconfigured into admiration. The guests didn't see a tragedy. They saw a power move. They saw a woman so dominant she could force her own history to kneel before her. Robert and Linda stood frozen as the conversation flowed around them. They were no longer parents. They were props. They were artifacts on display, confirming the legend of Alara Vance. The rest of the night was a blur of accolades. Alara moved through the room, fueled by a cold electric high. Every time she glanced at her parents, she saw them shrinking. They were fading into the background, blending in with the furniture, just as Robert had promised. They were invisible. By 2 a.m., the last Tesla had wound its way down the driveway. The caterers were packing up the trucks. The house fell silent, save for the eternal rhythm of the Pacific. Alara found her parents sitting on the edge of the sofa in the living room. They still hadn't loosened their formal wear. They looked like statues left behind in a museum after closing time. Alara walked over to the coffee table and picked up a heavy iron key. She dropped it onto the glass surface. It made a sharp, definitive clack. "The guest wing," she said. "Make sure you wipe your feet before you go in." Robert reached out and took the key. His hand was shaking. He didn't look up. He looked broken, thoroughly and completely. The man who had once loomed over her like a tyrant was now just an old tenant, unable to pay his rent. "Good night, Alara," Linda whispered, her voice hollow. "Good night," Alara replied. She watched them walk away. They moved slowly, leaning on each other, disappearing down the long, shadowed corridor that led to the detached wing. They were safe. They were housed. They were fed. And they were utterly defeated. Alara turned away from them and walked to the massive window overlooking the ocean. She pressed her hand against the cool glass. She expected to feel a surge of joy, or perhaps a release of the anger that had driven her for a decade. She waited for the satisfaction to settle in. But there was nothing. No joy. No anger. Just the quiet. The victory was absolute, but it was also sterile. She had turned her parents into employees, her trauma into currency, and her home into a monument. She realized then that she hadn't just built a fortress to keep the world out. She had built a mausoleum for her own heart, and she was the sole resident. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass, perfect, untouchable, and alone. "Structure holds," she whispered to the empty room. Alara turned off the lights, leaving the house to the darkness and the sound of the waves breaking against the stone below, eroding the cliff, grain by grain, forever.